What's up, everybody? Khaled Iwamura here from Insaga.com. I have Charles Sousa, the newest Liberal MP for Mississauga-Lakeshore. Congrats on the win.
Thank you so much. I feel very privileged and excited about the opportunity.
So what does this mean to you to get back into the political scene?
Well, I mean, I've enjoyed my time in the provincial government and certainly the portfolios and the things I was able to do. I enjoy the community and giving back and being engaged and providing some value. And I've also enjoyed my private sector work. I've been more in the private sector than I have in politics, but it's all about giving back. It's all about trying to do something more longstanding. And this is an opportunity to do just that. And I'm very excited.
Awesome. Cool. I know you've been campaigning hard because with social media now, you can see exactly what you're doing. So, I mean, what was brought up in your campaign? What did you hear from your residents and in Mississauga? What do they want?
Yeah, so in this area, we have the waterfront, right? The entire waterfront in Mississauga-Lakeshore. And so protecting that airshed and watershed is important to them. So there's some environmental issues, and I certainly was quite involved in all that when we were looking at protecting what we call the Clarkson airshed study and developing the Lakeview lands and the port credit opportunities and now Canada lands, which is owned by the federal government. So those discussions have come up, and transit and congestion and the ability to have smart growth in the community because the goal lines and the hubs all exist in the south as well. Okay. That was one aspect. Another one was more seniors, those on fixed income, those that are looking for programs and supports to enable them to have greater security as they go forward. And healthcare, right, to ensure that they have home care and services that they require. And of course, families, man, moms and dads, people like myself who grew up here and have had my own kids, they've all grown up, is just to provide enough for them to have a good start in life. So affordability was also an issue.
Nice. I know you guys have probably one of the biggest developments down there, or probably a multitude of biggest developments down there in Lakeview, Port Credit, and stuff like that. So are you excited for all that to happen?
Well, I was engaged in most of it in my time. Yeah. I mean, so the Lakeview lands is something that I was fighting for some time. Jim Tovey became a councillor afterwards, and together we were working on a number of initiatives. One of the biggest ones, of course, was to prevent another power plant from being able to be allowed in those lands. And having grown up in this area, I walked down Ogden Avenue all my life going to school, and I never had a view of the lake, and it's called Lakeview. So yeah. That was one of the ideas, is try to provide public access to the community. And it's 400 acres in total when you combine that with other industrial lands. And so that was a big undertaking. It was very much a community engaged project, and I was part of it. I must have participated in about 15, 16 different town halls in regards to all power plants in the community in the waterfront, because it wasn't just Lakeview, then it became Clarkson, and then it became Oakville. And then there was a big one that blew up, which is the smallest one of all, which was in Cooksville, outside my riding. And so everyone was concerned about emissions going into our community, having had so much of it over so many years. I mean, the Four Sisters, which was the power plant, the coal power plant that existed there, it did its job. It was an economic powerhouse, came in the 50s and so forth, but it outlasted its shelf life. And it was creating a lot of health concerns in the community too. And I got to tell you, one of the things I'm most proud of is that we had about 60 smog days or thereabouts every year. And after we took care of it, after we redeveloped and revitalized the area, we've had none. And this is part of the initiatives that we're trying to do, is protect the community. So, and now a lot of development is being proposed along that waterfront. We want to make certain that we safeguard the village feel, the destination ability, the pedestrian use, and access to the waterfront. I think those are all important to the community as well.
Awesome. I'm going to touch on some macro issues here. What do you think the government needs to do to tackle kind of the pressing issues in Canada, kind of healthcare crisis, inflation, supply chain issues, unaffordable housing?
So there's a lot of big issues there. And my previous role, I've also dealt heavily with the federal government at the time to try to provide for increased transfers and support for healthcare. And we look at those transfer payments. But one of the things I was prepared to do during my time there was to be accountable for it. So during the pandemic, we've had so many transfers from the federal government to the provinces, and they haven't been accounted for, and they haven't been utilized effectively for the front lines, for the nurses and the docs, for the surgeries, for the PSWs. I left politics and I started my own foundation to build a long-term care and affordable housing complex. It's 350 units, and it's a not-for-profit, it's a charity. It's a very huge undertaking, and I know how difficult it is to get all those approvals done, and more importantly, safeguard the residences as you use them. But the biggest issue is talent and support and funding. So one of the things I would call for is to have a full review of what is being proposed, what systems are being amended for delivering of healthcare. There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
There can be improvements. But then the biggest one is being accountable to those monies so that it's not just a transfer payment, and then you don't account for it, and then we don't know where it's being sent. And then all of a sudden they use that money and they offset and reduce their budgets accordingly. And that defeats the purpose. And of course, the issue here is one of jurisdictions, right? People, the provinces don't want to give up that jurisdictional ability and right to oversee healthcare, but they want the money as well. So we have to find a balance by which to do that. So that was healthcare.
Yeah.
I think your other question,
yeah, sure. I offloaded a lot there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, inflation, supply chain challenges. Let's talk about unaffordable housing, because that's a big issue.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So, and it was an issue of concern that I had back at the time when we were looking at providing some restrictions for leverage, ensuring that people weren't overexposed to higher loans. And then, of course, we were looking at the bubble. I mean, I was always concerned that there was going to be a correction. Imagine in 2008, when I came into being and when I assumed some of my role as vice chairman at the time of the Treasury Board, we had a huge recession, and it was felt globally. And people were throwing their keys back at the banks because they couldn't afford their homes in the United States and in Europe. Yet in Ontario and in Canada, we were safeguarded, right? We didn't have that issue. In fact, pricing of homes were going up, not down. And so the correction didn't take place. And I was around during the 90s when I did own a couple of properties, and I was caught in a downturn in the market. So I was sensitive to that when it happened. So we were trying to find ways to create a soft landing, but it never happened because it kept going up. And then people started to complain that it became too unaffordable. Bidding wars and foreign owners coming in and buying up speculative properties, and those buying into the market and crowding out families that wanted to buy homes. So all those things were taking place at the same time because the demand became so great. So we put in some measures to try to minimize speculation, trying to declare people that were using capital gains and doing flips. We were also trying to restrict, as they did in British Columbia, from foreign ownership, where they had to then submit an extra tax if they were to buy it by way of spec. And of course, what we wanted is properties to be available for rent and or ownership. So all those things were done. And at the same time, the federal government were taking precautions to minimize leverage, right? And they put limitations and restrictions on first home buyers and others so that they'd have greater down payment and being able to afford ultimately if interest rates were going up. And that's the case we have now. So I'm sensitive to what kind of debt exists and how people are going to be able to maintain their homes with the increase in interest rates, given or assuming they haven't fixed their rate at the time. At the same time, we're trying to provide service for first-time home buyers, enable them to get more benefit from their down payments, be it RSPs and insurance. So we took some of those steps, but it's a big issue. I have 3 kids of my own, and they're all adults, and they're all trying to figure out how to buy homes, and it's not easy, especially the GTA. It's not a big issue. And now with rates being, modified a bit, then you worry about what are people going to do that have all of a sudden their monthly payments are going up. And so we haven't seen it as of yet, and the demand is still great. So I'm hopeful that home values will be protected, but there are obviously, and you've just had a discussion with some real estate agents. I'm sure they've been able to explain it better than I am right now, but the market has some uncertainty in it.
For sure. So a recent poll came out saying that the Tories are holding a little bit of a lead in Ontario. What does the Liberals have to do to win over Ontarians?
Really honestly, I'm not playing the partisan role here. I don't really care what level of government we're talking about or what stripe you have. Like, people I talk to, they just want things done, right? They just want to get stuff done. And if somebody comes to my office and be it a municipal issue or now, in my case, a provincial issue, you still want to help them. You still want to serve them effectively. And when I look at my relationships with other governments and other political, and people have different political partisanship, I work with them regardless. I mean, that's our duty, our responsibility. So if I'm going to start looking at polls to determine how I'm going to act, and then make election cycle decisions or making political decisions, they don't end up well. They certainly don't end up well for the taxpayer who's relying on us to do what's necessary. Here, I'll give you an example. As I was leaving, we put in a cap and trade system. So we put in a carbon price system in the province of Ontario. We were generating $1.7 billion a year. We're part of the Western Climate Initiative, together with Quebec and California and others. And we were exempt from a carbon tax. There was no need to us to go to individuals and jack up the prices in the pumps, any of that stuff. It was all incorporated. And the beauty of the project or the program was dollar for dollar reinvested into green jobs, green economy, retrofits, electric batteries. Like, we were well ahead of the curve on electric vehicles in Ontario. So we had a lot of stuff that we were doing, and it allowed Ontario to be independent without having to deal with what was being brought in by the federal government at the time. Well, we lost, and the Conservative government came in, and they decided to dismantle cap and trade and fight the federal government on a carbon tax. And there was none. It was totally unnecessary. That's a political decision. Another one that infuriates me is election cycle decisions, when you're trying to buy votes, so they say, when it comes to election, like we did with the license plates and so forth. And what did we do? We sacrificed so much more that was necessary for healthcare. Like, that's where people, and so those things are part of the system, I guess. I try to avoid it. I really do. In the last budget, I wasn't really keen on some of the work that was being proposed. So I back-ended a lot of that, and the government came in and dismantled it all. But they dismantled even more. Even distribution of cannabis, for example. We already had 80 and 90 stores rolled out in a system that would allow for distribution in Ontario under one umbrella, the Ontario Cannabis Corporation. And we already had sites planned out, and we already had agreements with the municipalities and Indigenous and First Nations communities. And I put $0, but we knew there would be billions, $1 billion or thereabouts in revenue to come from it. But the difference is, I also incorporated a separation of the labor union that was involved. It was a subset of the LCBO, but not the LCBO specifically. And I did it so I can monetize the play in 5 to 6 years' time. So that then the value that was created by this distribution would have then been able to be used for the benefit of the public, whoever wanted then to buy shares or monetize it, and allow, because it was the dispute was it should be a private sector business, not a government business, right? We don't want to get into prohibition, but what we wanted to do is provide the public enough comfort and confidence that the distribution of the product that was there was safe. And then we were able to provide education and healthcare benefits for addiction, and enabled us to have some protection measures. And more importantly than all of that, we would be able to go after the underground economy, be able to combat the illegal and the underground that sort of. And what do we have now? A proliferation of cannabis shops, all in the same area that we're trying to protect, and they're cannibalizing each other, and we're not getting the benefit, unfortunately. Sure. So, I mean, you asked me, would I be able to, what's in it for me if it's a conservative or a liberal government? I don't care. All I care about is doing the job as best I can.
Awesome. So we have you, Charles, for another 3 years. What can they expect from you?
Well, I hope to be a strong voice for the community. I hope to be able to fight for the benefit of, those that are most in need. And I hope that I can be able to provide some stimulus to promote economic growth. For me, I really want, and there's nation building that you can do. I mean, I provided a national cooperative securities regulator that I promoted when I was the minister at the time. And I made agreements with 8 other provinces. And it's very sensitive because these are, again, jurisdictional issues, but it made us more competitive on the global stage, on a capital markets to attract foreign direct investment. The outliers were Quebec and Alberta, and we anticipated that, but we had a great opportunity to do something much more, I think, much more. It was a nation building exercise to enable us to be competitive, to attract businesses, right? Because you go to the United States, they don't have to deal with 12, 13 different levels of government and regulators to promote their manufacturing or distribution. So it seemed that it would be appropriate. I would do the small caps in British Columbia. We would do the oil and gas in Alberta. Ontario continued to do all its financial. Right now, though, what happened is Ontario is still seen as the national regulator, even though it's still only a provincial regulator. So I was trying to provide greater benefit and unity across Canada. Another item of unification was to set pensions. So the Canada Pension Plan needs to be needed to be enhanced. And so we were trying to find ways to do so. And we needed agreement from all of Canada. It was difficult. So Ontario started to promote an Ontario pension plan, which was difficult for me because it was an expensive alternative and for businesses in Ontario, but it would have provided an additional source of attention that Ontario residences and workers would have an additional benefit by having an additional pension plan alongside Canada Pension. Well, certainly the other provinces weren't keen on seeing us do that, but they also weren't keen on enhancing CPP. So my nation building exercise was, great, let's enhance CPP and I won't do it. And so it came to that. And finally, we did a signed agreement, and I was very proud of being part of that. So I hope to be able to continue doing these kind of exercises that help stimulate economic growth, enable us to continue to provide for foreign direct investment. And I can't control the geopolitics right now out there. It is very sensitive, and it's creating a lot of inflationary pressures as a result. I certainly won't do any reckless, gimmicky cryptocurrency, like anything that puts Canada in jeopardy or puts our Canadian dollar in jeopardy or puts our national security in jeopardy. Yeah, you can't do those kind of things. You can't just be flippant about it. These are complicated issues that require serious players, right? So I intend to do just that.
Cool. Thoughts on Pierre Poilievre?
Listen, he's a very dynamic, excellent speaker. He's very persuasive. I've seen him. I saw him speak at the Empire Club just prior to me agreeing. I hadn't yet agreed to run. And that was on a Thursday or Wednesday. And I actually only agreed to do this on the Friday afterwards. Part of it was I was a bit taken aback by a guy who's complaining about gatekeepers who has been protected by gatekeepers all his life. I mean, that's all he is. He's a career politician. He got elected right out of school. He's got his full pension when he was like 31 or, like a few years later. And he talks about Canada being broken when I'm thinking, well, Canada leads the world in so many issues. I mean, I want to be as positive as I can. I don't want to be, how should I say this? I want to be realistic. And I want us to be able to resolve solutions seriously. I don't want to fearmonger. I don't want to provide division. And I don't want us to be toxic against one another. There's a lot of good that happens in Canada. I mean, when I hear him talk about the fight on drugs, the war on drugs, he's going to put in jeopardy a lot of good things that are happening to provide supports for individuals with addictions. And we've seen it happen in other parts of the world, and it works. It reduces crime. It helps them get rehabilitated, and enables us to protect mental health and general health. I mean, there are some countries in the world where they stop the swapping of needles and so forth. It brought down AIDS in a huge way. It brought down crime in a huge way. So there are things that are necessary to do carefully. So I don't want to bring Canada back in time. I don't want us to churn back the dials on some positive things that have been had. There's always things that can be improved. There's always things that we can do better. Absolutely. But we need to be open-minded, and we got to be certain that we don't fearmonger. Certainly don't go out there and stand. I believe in protest. I believe in freedom of speech. I believe in all of those things. But the moment you cross the line and then you take away the rights of others, where you put others at risk, then you've crossed the line. When you put the country at risk by blocking trade in the billions a day, that's not smart. And for him to be standing there and promoting insurrection is a dangerous thing for a man to do who wants to then become the leader of the country.
So you watching a Pierre Poilievre talk put you over the edge to sign up to become an MP?
Well, I mean, I've always been interested in politics. I've always been doing it. But yeah, I mean, you got to remember, people are saying, oh my gosh, you know, he's got the momentum. He's the man. He's the guy. He's going to go. No, he's not. There's some, and I know the chair. I work with these guys. I'm on boards with individuals from the conservative parties as well. So I get the progressive conservatives. I understand. But when you're not being progressive, when you're being extreme from the right or the left, you know, I don't want to be that guy either. I'm a very much eccentric guy who wants to see a balanced approach to things, who wants to balance the books. I want to see us grow the economy to serve and sustain the programs that are necessary for us in healthcare and education and transportation and in trade. And you talked about the supply chain. We need people who are going to be open to promoting and encouraging protection of the supply chain, and to use certain things that he's talked about in the past. That's not economic well-being. So he talked about quantitative easing at this thing, because you want to show people that he understood it as he was reading from a script, and then he was contradicting himself throughout. And I go, that's it. This is not the way a leader should say. And not everyone knows everything. Absolutely not. We all have our limitations, but boy, you have to work collaboratively with others and not be destructive or combative or get ahead at the expense of other people. And that's not my character.
And the toughest question I'm going to ask you now, what's your favorite place to eat in Mississauga?
You know where I was just the other day? The opening of a Mexican restaurant called, I can't remember. Yeah, that's right. So I was there with Richie, and then we did a little Foo Friday. I loved it. There's a lot of great places in Mississauga that I like in Port Credit and Lakeview and Clarkson, for that matter. I mean, Capra's is great. I enjoy going there too. There's a lot of neat little spots, and it's up and coming. There's a lot more coming, I'm hoping.
Yeah, you have by far the best pocket of food in Mississauga. So, but Charles Sousa, thank you so much, and congratulations on the win.
Hey, thank you very much for the opportunity. All the best.
Okay.
Cheers.